They thought they were dealing with a confused old man who had lost his grip on reality. They thought that by the time I realized what was happening, the ink on the court papers would already be dry, and I would be nothing more than a prisoner in my own life. My daughter, the little girl I taught to ride a bike, and her husband, a man I welcomed into my family, had spent months planning my demise while smiling in my face. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot that before I was a retiree, before I was a grieving widower, I was the toughest structural engineer in Seattle. I spent 40 years finding cracks in foundations before buildings collapsed. And tonight, I was not going to be the victim. I was going to be the one holding the detonator. If you have ever felt the people closest to you underestimating your strength, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss how I turned the tables on the ultimate betrayal. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? It brings me great comfort to know I am not alone in this fight. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of gray, drizzly Seattle night that makes the city lights look like smeared oil paintings against the glass. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my master bedroom, adjusting my silk tie. It was a deep burgundy, the one my late wife Eleanor had bought me for our 40th anniversary. Even now, 2 years after she passed, I could still almost feel her cool fingers straightening the knot, telling me I looked handsome. I looked at my reflection. At 70 years old, I did not see a man fading away. I saw Harrison Ford. Not the actor, though Eleanor always joked about the resemblance, but Harrison Ford, the builder. I stood tall. My shoulders were square. My hair was white, yes, but my eyes were sharp, clear, and focused. I went to the gym 4 times a week. I read engineering journals to keep my mind active. I managed my own investment portfolio. I was healthy. I was strong. And tonight, I was happy. My daughter Maya had invited me over for a special family dinner. It had been weeks since I had seen her and my grandchildren. She said she had a surprise for me, something to celebrate. I missed the noise of a full house. Since Eleanor died, the silence in this 5,000-square-foot penthouse could be deafening. I looked out the window at the Space Needle piercing the clouds. I had consulted on the retrofitting of that structure years ago. I knew every bolt, every stress point. I felt a surge of pride. I was still relevant. I was still capable. I grabbed my jacket from the bed, humming a jazz tune under my breath. I felt good. I felt optimistic. Then my phone vibrated against the marble countertop of the dresser. It was a long, aggressive vibration, not the short ping of a social notification. I picked it up, expecting maybe a text from Maya asking me to pick up wine on the way. It was a message from Marcus Solano, my personal attorney and oldest friend. The preview text on the screen was written in all capital letters. Harrison. Do not go there. They filed in King County Court this morning. Call me now. My heart skipped a beat. The humming stopped. The silence of the penthouse suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. Solano was not a man who used capital letters. Solano was a man of whispers and calm strategies. For him to scream through a text message meant the building was already on fire. I tapped the call button. He answered on the first ring. Harrison, tell me you are not at Maya's house yet. Solano's voice was breathless, panicked. I could hear papers shuffling violently in the background. I am just leaving, Marcus. What is going on? You are scaring me. Listen to me very carefully, Harrison. You need to stop. You need to sit down. Do not go to that dinner. Why? What did they file? Is Maya in trouble? She is not in trouble, Harrison. You are. I waited. The rain lashed against the window. Solano took a deep breath. At 9 o'clock this morning, your daughter and her husband filed an ex parte petition for emergency guardianship over your person and your estate. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound that escaped my throat before I could stop it. Guardianship. Marcus, that is ridiculous. That is for people who cannot feed themselves, people with advanced dementia. I just beat you at squash last week. They are claiming you are incapacitated, Harrison. They have affidavits. They have a report from a doctor you have never met, claiming you are exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline, paranoia, and inability to manage your finances. They are asking the judge for immediate control over your bank accounts, your property, and your medical decisions. They want to put you in a facility, Harrison, a secure memory care unit. Tonight, the world tilted on its axis. My knees, which I prided myself on keeping strong, felt weak. I sat down on the edge of the bed, crushing the neatly pressed duvet. Incapacitated. The word tasted like ash. Maya. My Maya. The girl who used to sit on my lap while I reviewed blueprints. The woman whose college tuition I paid in full. The daughter I comforted when she went through her first divorce. She was saying I was crazy. She was trying to lock me away. But why I whispered? Solano's voice dropped, becoming deadly serious. Because of the liquidity event, Harrison. The sale of the waterfront property closes next week. $12 million in cash hitting your account. If they have guardianship, they control that money. They can drain it before you ever see a dime, paying themselves huge administrative fees to manage your life. I looked back at the mirror. The man in the reflection looked the same, but his eyes had changed. The warmth was gone. The excitement about a family dinner was dead. In its place, a cold, steel-gray anger began to rise. It was the same feeling I used to get when a contractor tried to use cheap steel in a load-bearing wall. It was the realization that the structure was compromised. "Harrison, are you there?" Solano asked. "Stay home. I am coming over. We will fight this tomorrow. Do not go near them. If they provoke you, if you get angry, they will use it as proof of your instability." I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city I had helped build. I was an engineer. When we find a fault line, we do not run away from it. We inspect it. We document it. We expose it. "No, Marcus," I said, my voice steady now. "No." "What do you mean, no, I am going to dinner?" "Harrison, that is suicide. They are waiting to ambush you. They probably have the papers there to serve you, or worse, they have emergency responders on standby to take you for an evaluation if you raise your voice." "Let them try," I said, buttoning my jacket. "I need to see her face, Marcus. I need to look her in the eyes when she lies to me. And I need evidence." What evidence? I walked over to my desk. In the bottom drawer, buried under old drafting tools, was a small black device. It was a high-fidelity digital voice recorder, the kind I used to use on construction sites to record inspections over the roar of jackhammers. It was small, discreet, and powerful. I checked the battery. Full charge. I am going to get them on tape, Marcus. I am going to let them talk. I am going to play the confused old man they think I am. I will ask questions. I will get them to admit why they are doing this. And when we go to court, it won't be your word against theirs. It will be their own greedy voices hanging them. "Harrison, please. I will call you when I leave, Marcus. Have the injunction ready for the morning." I hung up the phone. My hands were trembling, not from age and not from fear. They were trembling from adrenaline. The betrayal felt like a physical blow to my ribs, a dull ache that made it hard to breathe. But I pushed the pain down. I locked it away in a box in my mind. Right now, I could not afford to be a heartbroken father. I had to be a cold, calculating operator. I took the small recorder. I clipped it securely to the inside of my shirt, just beneath the knot of my burgundy tie. I put on my jacket and checked the mirror again. You could see nothing. I walked to the elevator of my penthouse. The ride down to the garage felt like descending into a war zone. I got into my vintage Mercedes, the engine roaring to life with a low, powerful growl. As I pulled out onto the wet streets of Seattle, heading toward the suburbs where my daughter lived in a house I had paid for, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. They wanted to declare me incompetent. They wanted to take my freedom. They wanted to erase 40 years of hard work and dignity just to get their hands on a check. I merged onto the highway, the windshield wipers slicing back and forth like a metronome counting down the seconds to the explosion. I was Harrison Ford. I was a builder. And tonight I was going to tear their entire plan down brick by brick. I arrived at her driveway 10 minutes later. The house was glowing with warm, inviting light. It looked like a sanctuary. It was a trap. I took a deep breath, patted the recorder on my chest to ensure it was active, and stepped out into the rain. The game was on. I turned off the ignition but remained sitting in the car for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof of my Mercedes. The engine ticked as it cooled, a dying mechanical heartbeat in the silence of the suburban evening. Through the windshield, the house I had purchased for Natalie and Greg 5 years ago loomed in the darkness. When I signed the check for the down payment, a check that represented a significant portion of my liquid assets at the time, this place had been a jewel. It was a sprawling colonial with white pillars and manicured hedges, a symbol of the life I wanted for my daughter. I wanted her to have the stability I had worked 80-hour weeks to build. I wanted her to be safe. But as I squinted through the rain, the reality of their current situation revealed itself in the details only a father or an engineer would notice. The landscape lighting along the pathway was dark, likely broken bulbs they had never bothered to replace. The lawn, once the envy of the neighborhood, was overgrown, even in the dim light of the street lamps. I could see the weeds choking the azalea bushes, rising like green cancers from the soil. I rolled down my window slightly. The air smelled of damp earth and neglect. I looked up at the second story. The paint around the window frames was peeling, curling outward like dry skin shedding from a wound. A shutter on the master bedroom window hung slightly askew, missing a hinge. It was a small detail, perhaps invisible to a casual passerby, but to me it screamed of financial distress. You do not let a house like this rot unless you cannot afford to fix it. You do not let the property value plummet unless you are paralyzed by debt. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. Solana was right. This was not just about greed. This was about desperation. They were drowning, and instead of asking for a life raft, they had decided to sink me to keep themselves afloat. I adjusted the collar of my shirt, feeling the hard plastic of the recorder press against my collarbone. It was my shield. It was the only thing standing between me and the erasure of my identity. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, wet air, and stepped out of the car. My shoes crunched on the gravel as I walked up the driveway. I moved with a deliberate slowness, affecting the posture of the man they expected to see. I rounded my shoulders slightly. I let my steps be a little less sure. If they wanted a confused old man, I would give them the performance of a lifetime. I reached the front door and pressed the bell. I did not hear a chime inside. Broken. Of course it was broken. I knocked firmly on the solid wood, 3 distinct raps. I waited. I could hear movement inside, hushed whispers, the shuffling of feet. They were composing themselves. They were putting on their masks. A moment later, the door swung open. Natalie stood there, framed by the warm light of the hallway. For a split second, I saw the fear in her eyes, a raw, terrified panic that she quickly plastered over with a smile so wide it looked painful. She was wearing a floral dress I had never seen before, something modest and matronly, not her usual style. It was a costume just like my act was a costume. "Daddy," she exclaimed, her voice pitched an octave too high. "You made it. We were so worried you wouldn't come out in this rain." She lunged forward to hug me. I let her. I felt her arms wrap around my shoulders, but there was no warmth in the embrace. Her body was tense, vibrating with a nervous energy that made my own skin crawl. I patted her back awkwardly, careful not to let her hand brush against the device hidden under my tie. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, making my voice sound slightly raspy, slightly weary. I almost got lost coming off the highway. The exit signs, they don't look the way they used to. I felt her stiffen, then relax. I had fed her exactly what she wanted to hear. A sign of decline. A confession of confusion. "Oh, Daddy." "That is okay," she said, pulling back and looking at me with a pity that made me want to scream. "Come inside. It is warm in here." I stepped over the threshold. The air inside the house was stale, masked by the heavy artificial scent of vanilla air freshener. It was the smell of someone trying to hide something. Standing in the hallway, leaning against the banister leading to the kitchen, was Greg. My son-in-law. The man who had once asked for my permission to marry my daughter with tears in his eyes. He was wearing a casual polo shirt and slacks, but his stance was all wrong. He had his hands buried deep in his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He couldn't even look me in the eye. He stared somewhere over my left shoulder, focusing on the wallpaper. "Hi, Harrison," Greg mumbled, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Good to see you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who was plotting to take away my rights. "Hello, Greg," I said, keeping my tone mild. "The yard is looking a bit wild, son. You need to get someone out there before the roots damage the foundation." Greg flinched. He finally looked at me, his eyes darting nervously to Natalie. "Yeah, well, we have been busy. You know how it is." "We are handling it, Dad." Natalie cut in quickly, grabbing my arm and steering me toward the living room. "Don't worry about the house. We have so much to talk about. We have a surprise for you." She led me into the main living area. The furniture was the same, but the room felt different. It felt staged. The coffee table was clear of clutter. The blinds were drawn tight, shutting out the world. And then I saw him. Sitting in my favorite leather armchair, the one I always sat in when I visited, was a stranger. He was a heavy-set man, perhaps in his late 50s, with thinning hair combed severely across his scalp. He wore a navy blazer that looked a size too small, the fabric straining across his chest. As we entered, he stood up, smoothing his jacket with a practiced, oily motion. "Daddy," Natalie said, her grip on my arm tightening. "I want you to meet a friend of ours. This is Dr. Thorne. He was just finishing up a round of golf with Greg, and we invited him to stay for dinner." "Dr. Thorne?" I repeated, letting the name roll around in my mouth. The man stepped forward, extending a hand. His skin was pale and clammy. As I shook his hand, I noticed his fingernails. They were yellowed, stained deep with nicotine, the sign of a chain smoker. A doctor who smokes. A doctor who golfs in the rain. I glanced down at his feet. He was wearing black leather loafers, the kind you buy at a discount store. They were scuffed at the toes, and along the heel there was a thick cake of dried mud. These were not the shoes of a man who had just come from a country club. These were the shoes of a man who had walked through a wet parking lot, or perhaps a man who made house calls to dirty places. This was the man who had signed the affidavit. This was the hired gun who was going to certify that I was insane. "Pleasure to meet you, Harrison," Dr. Thorne said. His voice was smooth baritone, the kind of voice used to sell used cars or bad insurance policies. "Natalie and Greg have told me so much about you." "I bet they have," I said, releasing his hand and wiping my palm subtly on my trousers. "A golf friend." "You said," Greg coughed from the doorway. Yeah, we play at the municipal course sometimes." I looked at Greg, then back at the doctor. The municipal course had been closed for renovations for 3 weeks. I knew this because my firm was handling the drainage contract. But I said nothing. I just nodded a slow, vacant nod. "Well, it is nice to meet you," I said. "I suppose I will sit on the sofa then." Natalie guided me to the couch, positioning me so that I was facing the two men. It felt like an interrogation setup. "I am just going to lock up," Natalie said, her voice trembling slightly. "We don't want any interruptions." She walked back to the front door. I sat still, my heart hammering against the recorder, waiting. I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing. Then came the sound of the deadbolt sliding home. Click. then the chain lock sliding into its track. Click. And finally, the turn of the handle lock. Click. 3 locks. The sound echoed through the silent house like the steel bars of a prison cell slamming shut. I was trapped. I was alone with 3 people who wanted to destroy me. But as I looked at the cheap mud on the doctor's shoes, I knew something they didn't. I wasn't locked in here with them. They were locked in here with me. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space that used to echo with laughter during holiday meals, but now felt as cold and sterile as an operating theater. We sat at the long mahogany table with Natalie at the head, Greg to her right, and the stranger, Dr. Thorne, directly across from me. The silence was thick, only broken by the scrape of silverware against china. I watched them. I watched how Greg could not keep his hands still, how he kept adjusting the placement of his wineglass. Then he stood up, reaching for a decanter on the sideboard. "I have been saving this," he announced, his voice too loud for the quiet room. "It is a Cabernet Sauvignon vintage 1985. I thought tonight called for something special, Harrison." He poured a generous amount into my glass, the dark red liquid swirling like blood. I looked at the glass, then at Greg. 1985 was the year I started my own firm. He knew that. It was a calculated gesture designed to lower my defenses, to make me feel honored while they sharpened their knives. "Drink up, Harrison," Greg urged, sitting back down and watching me with an intensity that made the hair on my arms stand up. "It needs to breathe a little, but it is excellent." The voice of Solano rang in my head like a warning bell. "Do not eat or drink anything they give you, Harrison. If they want to declare you incompetent, drugging you to make you slur your words or stumble is the oldest trick in the book." I lifted the glass. The aroma was rich, oaky, but underneath it, I imagined I could smell something chemical, something that did not belong. I knew I had to play the part. I brought the crystal to my lips, tilting my head back slightly. As the wine touched my tongue, I did not swallow. Instead, I let the liquid sit there for a second, feigning a savoring pause before bringing my heavy linen napkin up to my mouth to wipe away a drop. In that concealed motion, I spat the wine into the thick fabric, folding it quickly and placing it on my lap. "It has a strong finish," I said, keeping my voice level. "Thank you, Greg." He smiled, and I saw his shoulders relax. He thought he had me. He thought the sedative or whatever was in there would start working soon. I took a piece of bread and crumbled it on my plate, moving food around to make it look like I was eating, but I swallowed nothing. "So Dad," Natalie started, her voice taking on that concerned pediatric tone she used on her children. "We have been worried about you lately." "Worried?" I asked, looking up from my plate. "Why would you be worried, Natalie? I am healthier than I have been in years." She exchanged a look with Dr. Thorne. "It is just that there have been incidents. Small things, but they are adding up. Like the keys. Do you remember last Tuesday when you called me in a panic because you could not find your house keys? You were convinced someone had stolen them." I stared at her, incredulous. "Natalie, I did not call you in a panic. I called you to ask if you had the spare set, because I left mine at the office. I drove back to the office and retrieved them. There was no panic. There was no theft." Natalie shook her head sadly, reaching out to touch my hand. "Dad, you were screaming. You said the neighbors were breaking in. You do not remember that, do you?" I felt a surge of heat in my chest. This was gaslighting, pure and simple. She was rewriting history, trying to make me doubt my own memory. I withdrew my hand from hers. "That never happened, Natalie. I have the call logs. I was perfectly calm." Dr. Thorne cleared his throat. He wiped his greasy mouth with a napkin and leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. "Mr. Ford, what you are describing is very common. We call it confabulation. When the mind cannot retrieve a memory, it invents a logical one to fill the gap. You believe you went to the office because that is a safe, rational explanation. But your daughter is telling you the reality of the situation. Agitation and paranoia regarding personal belongings are classic early signs of cognitive decline. I looked at the doctor. His eyes were flat, devoid of empathy. He was not diagnosing me, he was reciting a script. "I am an engineer, doctor," I said, sharpening my tone. "I deal in facts. The fact is my keys were on my desk. The fact is I drove there and got them." See, Greg whispered loudly to Natalie. "He is getting aggressive." "I am not getting aggressive, Greg. I am correcting a falsehood." Natalie sighed, a long, tragic sound. "It is not just the keys, Dad. It is the money. You have been making impulsive transfers, large sums to accounts we do not recognize. We are just afraid you are being taken advantage of." I almost laughed. The only people trying to take advantage of me were sitting at this table. The transfers they were referring to were likely the payments to the forensic accountants I had hired to investigate their finances, but they did not know that yet. "I manage my own money, Natalie," I said, "and I manage it well." "But for how long?" Dr. Thorne interrupted softly. "Until you forget to pay the property tax. Until you sign a contract you do not understand." "Mr. Ford, nobody is saying you are crazy. We are saying you need help. We are saying you need a guardian." The word hung in the air. Guardian. The legal term for a jailer. I looked around the table. The walls felt like they were closing in. They were not listening to me. They were building a case brick by lie by brick. And then Natalie played her trump card. She looked down at her plate and then up at me, her eyes glistening with fake tears. "Mom would not want this for you, Dad." I froze. "Do not talk about your mother," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "She spoke to me, you know." Natalie continued pressing the knife deeper. "Before the end, when she was in the hospital and you were at work, she told me she was worried about you. She said you were becoming different, angry. She said she was afraid of your temper sometimes. She made me promise to look after you if you started losing your way. We are just doing what Mom wanted, Dad." The rage that exploded inside me was white hot. Eleanor had never been afraid of me. We had been partners, soulmates for 40 years. I held her hand when she took her last breath. I was the one who washed her hair when she was too weak to lift her arms. For Natalie to twist her memory, to use my dead wife as a weapon to steal my money, was unforgivable. It was a violation so deep it made me want to flip the table and scream. But I did not. I felt the recorder against my chest. I needed this. I needed the jury to hear how low they would stoop. I needed to capture their cruelty. I clenched my hands into fists under the table, digging my nails into my palms until it hurt. The pain grounded me. I took a shallow breath. She said that I asked, my voice trembling not with age, but with suppressed fury. "She did," Natalie nodded. "She wanted you to be safe. She wanted us to take control if things got bad." I closed my eyes. I let my head drop slightly. I needed to get out of there. I needed 5 minutes to breathe, to check the recorder, to wash the taste of their lies out of my mouth. If I stayed at this table 1 second longer, I would break character. And if I broke character, I would lose everything. I do not feel well," I stammered, swaying slightly in my chair. Greg perked up instantly. "Is it the wine?" "I do not know," I said, bringing a hand to my forehead. "The room is spinning. I need to go to the restroom." I pushed my chair back, scraping it loudly against the floor. I stood up, making sure to stumble just a little, grabbing the edge of the table for support. "Let me help you," Dr. Thorne said, starting to rise. "No," I snapped too quickly, then softened my tone. "No, please. I just need a moment. Just some cold water on my face. Please." I turned and walked toward the hallway, my legs feeling heavy. I could feel their eyes on my back. I could feel their excitement. They thought the drugs were working. They thought the old man was breaking down. I reached the bathroom door and stepped inside, locking it behind me with a trembling hand. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run loud and fast. I looked in the mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were burning with a fire that would burn this whole house down. I was not the victim here. I was the witness, and court was about to be in session. I closed the bathroom door, but I did not lock it. I turned the faucet on full blast, letting the water rush into the basin, creating a shield of white noise that would mask my movements. They thought I was sick. They thought I was a fragile old man splashing water on his face to keep from fainting because the wine had gone to his head. I looked at my watch. I gave myself exactly 5 seconds, counting them down in my head, like I was timing a demolition charge on a bridge. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I opened the door just a crack. The hallway was empty. The murmur of their voices drifted from the dining room, low and conspiratorial. They were probably celebrating their victory, clinking glasses over the grave of my freedom. I took off my shoes, holding them in my left hand so I could move silently in my socks. I crept down the hall past the family photos that now looked like lies framed in glass. I was not heading back to the dining room. I was heading to the den, the room Natalie used as her home office. It was the nerve center of this operation, and I needed to see the blueprints of their betrayal. I slipped inside the office and closed the door softly, leaving it unlatched just in case I needed to make a quick exit. The room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. In the old days, Natalie was organized. She was meticulous, just like I taught her to be. But this room was a disaster zone. Papers were piled high on every surface. Unopened envelopes spilled out of trash cans. It looked like the office of someone who had stopped trying to manage their life and was just trying to survive it. I moved to the desk, avoiding the creaky floorboard near the rug. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I started shifting through the piles of mail, using the flashlight on my phone to see in the gloom. Past due notices for credit cards. Final warnings from utility companies. Then I saw it. A thick envelope shoved hastily under the corner of the area rug, as if hiding it there made the problem disappear. I pulled it out. It was from the bank. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. I scanned the dates. They had not paid their mortgage in 6 months. 6 months. I did the math in my head instantly. The amount they owed was staggering. They were not just underwater, they were at the bottom of the ocean. This was why they needed my money. It was not about protecting me. It was about saving themselves from eviction. They were willing to lock me away in a facility just to keep this roof over their heads. My hand shook, not from age, but from a cold fury, as I took a picture of the document with my phone. This was motive. This was proof of financial desperation. I put the letter back exactly where I found it. I turned to the desktop computer. The screen was dark, but the tower was humming. I touched the mouse. The screen flickered to life. No password. Careless. Or maybe they just arrogantly assumed I would never be smart enough or bold enough to look. The email application was open. The inbox was full of urgent messages from creditors, but one subject line stood out. It was from a sender named thornmd@securemail.com. The subject line read, "Finalizing the package." I clicked it. My breath hitched in my throat. The email was short and brutal. It read, "Natalie, I have completed the retroactive medical notes dating back 6 months to establish a pattern of decline. The competency evaluation is ready for the judge. All we need is for him to sign the power of attorney voluntarily tonight, or for you to document a significant behavioral episode. If he acts out or becomes confused, call 911 immediately, and I will handle the admission at the hospital. We will have control of the accounts by tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen. Retroactive medical notes. That meant fake records. They were fabricating a medical history that did not exist. This doctor was not just a hired gun, he was a criminal for hire. He was writing a script for my life that ended in a padded room. I took a photo of the screen, making sure the date and time were visible. I had the smoking gun. I had the conspiracy in black and white. I pocketed my phone, ensuring the recorder was still running against my chest. I had what I came for. I had the debt, and I had the fraud. I turned to leave my hand reaching for the doorknob when I heard it. The floorboard in the hallway creaked. It was a specific creak, the one right outside the guest bathroom. Heavy footsteps were moving. Not toward the kitchen. Toward me. Greg. He was coming to check why I had been gone so long. I froze. If I opened the door now, I would run right into him. I could not explain why I was in the dark office. The element of surprise would be gone, and with Dr. Thorne there, they could physically restrain me and claim I was having an episode right then and there. The footsteps got closer. Thud. 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 He was 10 feet away. I looked around the room frantically. There was no other exit. The window was locked and alarmed. I was cornered. I looked at the closet door. It was slightly ajar. It was a desperate move, a child's hiding spot. But it was all I had. I slipped into the darkness of the closet, pulling the door shut just as the handle of the office door began to turn. The latch clicked. The door opened. A beam of light from the hallway cut across the floor. I held my breath, my heart pounding against my ribs like a hammer against steel. Greg stepped into the room. He stood there, silent, listening. I prayed he would not turn on the light. I prayed he would not see my shoes that I had left by the door. I was an engineer. I built safe places. But tonight, I was hiding in the dark, waiting for the monster to pass. I held my breath in the suffocating darkness of the coat closet, listening to the heavy breathing of my son-in-law. Greg stood in the center of the home office just a few feet away from where I was hiding. The beam of light from the hallway cut across the room, illuminating the chaos of unpaid bills and legal threats that littered the floor. I pressed my hand over my mouth, praying that the old hinges of the closet door would not betray me. Greg took a step forward, his shoes crunching on a crumpled piece of paper. He muttered something under his breath, a curse word directed at the mess, or perhaps at his own failing life. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, scanning the shadows. Then he turned. I heard him walk back into the hallway. The moment his back was turned, I knew I had a fraction of a second to act. I slipped out of the closet, moving like a ghost. I did not head back to the dining room immediately. Instead, I darted into the guest bathroom, which was just 2 doors down the hall, where I had left the water running. I slipped inside and locked the door, engaging the deadbolt with a soft click that was masked by the rushing water. I was safe. I looked at myself in the mirror. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but my face was composed. I was not just an old man anymore. I was a spy in my own home. I reached out and flushed the toilet, the loud mechanical roar announcing to everyone in the house exactly where I was. I turned off the faucet, dried my hands on a towel, and took a deep breath. It was time to go back into the arena. I walked back to the dining room. The conversation stopped the moment I entered. Natalie was gripping her wine glass so hard her knuckles were white. Dr. Thorne was tapping his fingers on the table, a nervous staccato rhythm. Greg was already back in his seat, looking flushed and agitated. "Sorry about that," I said, allowing a slight tremor in my voice as I sat down. "My stomach isn't what it used to be." Natalie offered a tight smile. "It is okay, Dad. We were just worried you had gotten lost again." I looked at her. Really looked at her. Before tonight I saw my little girl. I saw the child I had pushed on the swings. Now I saw a stranger. I saw a woman who was complicit in a scheme to erase her own father. I looked at Greg. He was cutting his steak aggressively, the knife screeching against the porcelain plate. I watched his eyes. They were not looking at me. They were fixed on my left wrist. I was wearing my Rolex Submariner, a vintage piece from the late 60s that Eleanor had bought for me when I got my first big promotion. It was worth more than his car. I saw the hunger in his gaze. He was not worried about my health. He was mentally pawning my watch. He was calculating how many months of mortgage payments it would cover. It was disgusting. It was a violation that felt colder and sharper than any physical blow. I realized then that I was not a person to them. I was a bank account with a pulse. I was an obstacle standing between them and the lifestyle they felt entitled to. The realization gave me a strange sense of calm. If they wanted to play games, I would show them how a master plays. I needed to push them. I needed to make them panic. I needed to force their hand so they would say something incriminating on the tape. I cleared my throat and took a sip of water. You know, I said keeping my tone conversational, but loud enough for the microphone to catch every word. Sitting here with you all tonight, it makes me think about legacy, about what we leave behind. Dr. Thorne leaned forward, his predatory instincts peaked. Legacy is very important, Harrison. It is why we want to make sure your assets are protected. I nodded slowly. Exactly. That is exactly what I have been thinking. I have been feeling a heavy burden lately. Too much property, too many accounts. It is distracting me from what really matters. Natalie's eyes lit up. She exchanged a quick, excited glance with Greg. That is what we are saying, Dad. We can help you with that burden. We can manage it for you so you do not have to worry. I smiled a sad, distant smile. I had a different idea, actually. I have been talking to the directors at the Seattle Children's Hospital. You know how much your mother loved that place? The air in the room seemed to freeze. Greg stopped chewing. Natalie's smile faltered. What do you mean, Dad? Natalie asked, her voice trembling slightly. Well, I continued, leaning back in my chair. I have decided to liquidate the investment portfolio next week. About $2 million. I am going to donate it all to the hospital to build a new wing in Eleanor's name. I think it is the right thing to do. I think it is what she would have wanted. The silence that followed was deafening. It was the sound of a bomb having been dropped in the center of the table. I watched the blood drain from Greg's face. $2 million. That was the money they were counting on. That was the money they had probably already spent in their heads. If I donated it next week, they would be left with nothing but their debt and their crumbling house. Dad, Natalie stammered. You can't do that. Why not? I asked innocently. It is my money. I want to do some good with it before I die. But that is reckless. Dr. Thorne interjected, his voice losing its smooth professional veneer and becoming sharp and urgent. Mr. Ford making such a massive financial decision on a whim is highly concerning. It indicates a lack of judgment. It is impulsive. It is not impulsive, I countered, enjoying their panic. I have been thinking about it for months. In fact, I have a meeting with their board on Thursday to sign the papers. Thursday. That gave them less than 48 hours. I saw the look of sheer terror in Natalie's eyes. She looked at Dr. Thorne, desperate, pleading. She was silently begging him to do something to stop me. She knew that if I walked out of this house tonight, that money was gone and their future was over. Dr. Thorne stared at me. His eyes were cold, hard flint. He knew I was playing them, or perhaps he just realized that the timeline had collapsed. He could not wait for a court order. He could not wait for a slow decline. He needed to stop me now. He slowly placed his napkin on the table. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen, clicking it open. It was a signal. It was the moment the pretenses dropped. I think Dr. Thorne said, his voice dropping to a menacing low register, that we need to address your condition immediately, Harrison. You are clearly not thinking straight. You are making irrational decisions that endanger your family's future. I looked at him, challenging him. My condition, doctor. And what condition is that? The condition that requires immediate intervention, he said. He looked at Natalie and nodded. It was the sign. The trap was springing shut. But they didn't know I had already dismantled the spring. They were moving in for the kill, but I was ready to hunt. Natalie reached down into her large designer handbag which sat heavily by her feet. The leather creaked as she rummaged through it, a sound that seemed to scratch against the tense silence of the room. She pulled out a blue legal folder thick with documents and slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me. The papers fanned out slightly, revealing the bold black text at the top of the first page. Durable Power of Attorney. Revocable Living Trust Amendment. It was the full package. It was the legal equivalent of a death certificate for a man who was still breathing. She uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen and placed it on top of the documents, the nib pointing at me like an arrow. "Dad," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that was meant to sound soothing, but sounded more like the hiss of a leaking pipe. "We can fix this. We can stop you from making a mistake you will regret. If you sign these papers right now, we can protect the assets. Dr. Thorne and I can handle the board at the hospital. We can tell them you were not in your right mind when you made that pledge." I looked down at the papers. I did not need to read the fine print to know what they said. They gave Natalie, and by extension Greg, full control over every dime I had earned in 50 years of labor. They gave them the right to sell my penthouse, liquidate my stocks, and yes, put me in a home if they deemed it necessary for my safety. "I do not understand, Natalie," I said, keeping my hands in my lap, away from the pen. "Why do I need to sign this now? I thought we were just having dinner." "Because you are not well." Dr. Thorne interjected, his voice firm and authoritative. "The very fact that you want to give away $2 million to strangers while your estate is in flux proves your cognitive impairment. This is standard procedure, Harrison. It is a safety net. Just sign it." "Daddy." Natalie pleaded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "Please, do it for Mom. Do it for us. We just want to take care of you. You are confused. You are forgetting things. Let us carry the burden." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at Greg, who was watching me with the intensity of a starving wolf. Then I looked at Natalie. The performance was flawless. If I did not know better, I would have believed her. I would have believed that I was slipping away and that she was my angel of mercy. But I felt the hard plastic of the recorder against my chest, and I felt the image of the foreclosure notice burning in my mind. I reached out and picked up the folder. Natalie held her breath. Greg leaned forward. I closed the folder deliberately, covering the text. Then I pushed it back across the table toward her. "No," I said clearly. The word hung in the air. Simple. Absolute. What? Natalie blinked. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean I am not signing anything," I said, my voice dropping the tremble I had feigned earlier. "I am not confused, Natalie, and I am certainly not incapacitated. I know exactly what day it is. I know exactly how much money is in my accounts. And I know exactly why you are so desperate for me to sign this tonight." Natalie's face hardened. Her eyes narrowed. "Dad, do not be difficult. You do not know what you are saying." "Oh, I think I do," I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. "I think I know that you have not paid the mortgage on this house in 6 months." The silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of tension. It was the silence of a vacuum after all the air has been sucked out of the room. Natalie froze. Greg's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Dr. Thorne stopped tapping his fingers. "I know about the foreclosure notice hidden under the rug in your office," I continued, my voice steady and cold. "I saw the letters from the bank. I saw the credit card bills. You are $500,000 in debt, Natalie. You are drowning, and you thought the easiest way to save yourself was to drown me. I watched the color drain from her face, leaving it a sickly gray. She looked at Greg, then back at me. The mask of the concerned daughter, the grieving child, the loving mother, it all began to crack. The facade was crumbling, and underneath it was something ugly and raw. "You went through my things," she whispered, her voice trembling with a different kind of emotion now. Rage. "I went looking for the truth," I replied, "because I knew my daughter would never try to commit me unless she had a reason. I just didn't think the reason would be a price tag." "That is enough," Greg shouted, slamming his hand onto the table. The wine glasses jumped. "You have no right to spy on us in our own house." "It is my house, Greg," I shot back, my voice rising to match his. "I paid for it. Just like I paid for your car, just like I paid for your wedding. And now you want to steal the rest. You want to declare me insane because you cannot manage your own greed." The explosion came then. It was not gradual. It was instant. Natalie stood up so abruptly, her chair fell backward with a loud crash. She was not crying anymore. Her face was twisted into a snarl, her lips pulled back from her teeth. "Greed," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You call it greed. You sit up in that penthouse with your millions, watching. The numbers go up while we struggle, while we suffocate. You selfish old man, Natalie," I said quietly, shocked by the venom in her voice. "Don't you dare judge us," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, and you are going to give it to a hospital, to strangers. When your own daughter is about to lose her home, you care more about your legacy than you care about your own blood. I would have helped you." I said the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "If you had asked, if you had told me the truth, I would have written the check. I always have. But you didn't ask, Natalie. You tried to erase me. You tried to take my freedom. Because you are a controlling narcissist," she spat. "You would have held it over our heads forever. We needed the money without the strings. We needed what is rightfully ours. You are old, Dad. You had your time. Why can't you just let go? Why do you have to be so stubborn? Just sign the damn papers." She slammed her hand down on the folder again and again, a rhythmic thud of desperation. "Sign it, sign it." I looked at her and I saw the truth. There was no love left. Maybe there never had been. Just expectation. Just entitlement. My heart broke then. Not a crack, but a shatter. But I did not let it show. "No," I said softly. "Never." Natalie looked at me, her chest heaving. Then she looked at Dr. Thorne. Her eyes were wild. "Do it," she hissed. "Just do it." I started to stand up. "I am leaving," I said. "I am walking out that door and I am calling my lawyer." I turned toward the hallway, but Greg was already moving. He was younger than me. He was bigger than me. He moved with a speed I did not expect. He stepped between me and the archway, blocking the path to the front door. He crossed his arms, his face flushed with adrenaline and anger. "You are not going anywhere, Harrison," Greg said, his voice low and threatening. "You are not well. We cannot let you leave in this state." "Greg, move," I warned him. "Sit down," Greg said, taking a step toward me. I backed up, bumping into the sideboard. I looked around. I was trapped in the dining room. And then I saw Dr. Thorne. He had opened his black medical bag. He was not looking at me. He was focused on his hands. He held a small vial of clear liquid in one hand and a syringe in the other. He uncapped the needle with a practiced motion and inserted it into the vial, drawing back the plunger. The liquid filled the chamber. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising in genuine panic. Dr. Thorne tapped the side of the syringe, flicking away an air bubble. He looked up at me and his eyes were dead. "It is a sedative, Harrison," he said calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. "Just something to calm you down. You are extremely agitated. It is dangerous for your heart." "This is assault!" I shouted, backing away until I hit the wall. "You cannot do this. It is emergency medical intervention," Natalie said, her voice cold and detached. "You are having an episode, Dad. We are just helping you." "Greg, grab him," Thorne ordered, stepping around the table, the needle glinting in the chandelier light. Greg lunged for me. I raised my hands, but I knew I could not fight them both. The trap had not just sprung, it had turned into a slaughter. They were going to drug me, force my hand to sign, or simply keep me unconscious until the morning. But as Greg's heavy hands grabbed my shoulders, pinning me against the wall, I remembered one thing: the live stream. The button on my phone I had set up as a failsafe. I didn't need to fight them. I just needed to stall them for 10 more seconds. The fabric of my shirt tightened around my neck, choking off the air, as Greg shoved me back against the silk wallpaper of the dining room. I could smell the stale wine on his breath and feel the heat radiating from his frantic, desperate body. This was not the man who had asked for my blessing to marry my daughter 10 years ago in a shy, respectful voice. This was a man cornered by his own failures, a man who had decided that violence was the only bridge left to cross. His knuckles dug into my collarbone, and for a moment I felt the frailty of my 70 years. My mind was sharp, my will was iron, but my bones were old. I saw the wild look in his eyes, a mixture of panic and malice that told me he had crossed a line he could never uncross. "You have two choices, Harrison." Greg snarled, his face inches from mine. "You pick up that pen and you sign the trust over to us right now, or Dr. Thorne gives you a little cocktail. And let me tell you something about that cocktail. You will not just fall asleep. You will wake up tomorrow morning in a secure psychiatric facility strapped to a bed, and you will not remember a single thing about tonight. You will not remember the dinner. You will not remember this conversation. All you will know is that your mind finally snapped and we had to save you." I looked at him and then past him to Dr. Thorne. The doctor stood by the table holding the syringe with a steady hand. The needle caught the light from the chandelier, a thin silver promise of oblivion. He did not look like a medical professional anymore. He looked like an executioner waiting for the signal to drop the axe. "Is that your medical opinion, Doctor?" I managed to choke out, my voice strained against the pressure on my throat. "That I need to be chemically subdued because I refuse to be robbed." "It is a necessary intervention," Thorne replied, his voice devoid of any emotion. "You are a danger to yourself, Harrison. The courts will see it that way. The medical report is already written. One injection, and your version of the truth disappears forever." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. They had thought of everything. They were not just going to steal my money, they were going to steal my mind. They were going to gaslight me into believing I was insane until I actually became insane. It was a fate worse than death. But they had forgotten the small black device clipped to my chest. They had forgotten that every threat, every admission of guilt was being recorded in high-definition audio. I just needed a little more. I needed Natalie. I shifted my gaze to my daughter. She was standing by the overturned chair, her arms wrapped around herself as if she were cold. She was not looking at me. She was staring at the floor, her face a mask of conflict and resolve. "Natalie," I said, my voice soft, but cutting through the tension in the room. "Look at me." She did not move. "Look at me, daughter," I commanded, putting every ounce of my paternal authority into the words. Slowly, reluctantly, she raised her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but dry. "Is this what it has come to?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on hers, ignoring Greg's hand at my throat. "You are going to let them assault me. You are going to let them inject me with drugs and throw me in a madhouse. Me, the man who taught you how to ride a bicycle in the park when you were 6 years old. Do you remember that, Natalie? You were so scared to take the training wheels off. You cried. You said you would fall." "Stop it," Natalie whispered, shaking her head. I did not stop. I held the seat for you. I continued, the memory flooding back as vivid as if it were yesterday. I ran beside you for 3 blocks, holding you up until you found your balance. I promised I would never let you fall, and I never did. I have spent my entire life making sure you never fell, Natalie. When you wanted to go to art school, I paid for it. When you wanted this house, I bought it. That is enough, Greg shouted, tightening his grip. Sign the papers, old man. I ignored him. I spoke only to her, to the ghost of the little girl I once adored. And your wedding day, I said. You were shaking in the dressing room. You thought you were not ready. I took your hand. I walked you down the aisle and I placed your hand in his. I trusted him with you. And now you are letting him do this to me. You are letting him threaten my life for a bank account. Natalie closed her eyes. I saw a tear escape and roll down her cheek. For a second, I thought I had reached her. I thought the daughter I raised was still in there somewhere, buried under the debt and the lies. I thought she would scream at Greg to let me go. I thought she would end this madness. But when she opened her eyes, the tear was gone and the steel was back. She took a deep breath and her face hardened into a look of absolute coldness. A look I had never seen before. It was the look of a stranger. Don't you dare loiten camrade, she said, her voice low and venomous. Don't you dare use my childhood against me. It is not a weapon, Natalie. It is the truth, I said. The truth is that you are selfish, she snapped, stepping closer, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You talk about the past because it makes you feel like a hero. But where were you when we were drowning these last 6 months? Where were you when the bank started calling 5 times a day? You were busy playing the retired genius in your penthouse. I would have helped you, I repeated, my heart breaking in my chest. I do not want your help, she screamed, cutting me off. I want what is mine. I am your only child. That money is going to be mine eventually anyway. Why should I have to wait until you die while I lose everything now? Why should I lose my house, my status, my life, just because you are too stubborn to share? Because it is not sharing if you steal it, I said quietly. Natalie laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Call it what you want. I do not care about dignity anymore, Dad. I care about survival. Your money is the only thing that can save us. It is the only lifeline I have left. So do not look at me with those sad eyes. You forced us to do this. You made us the villains because you wouldn't be the father we needed. She turned her back on me. The gesture was final. It was a door slamming shut on 40 years of love. Finish it, she said to Greg. Get the signature. I do not care how. Greg grinned a feral, triumphant smile. He looked back at Dr. Thorne. You heard her, Dr. Greg said. He is not cooperating. Give him the shot. Dr. Thorne nodded. He walked toward me, the syringe raised. I watched the clear liquid inside the barrel. I watched the sharp tip of the needle. Hold him steady, Thorne said, stepping into my personal space. I need to find a vein in his neck to make it work faster. Greg shifted his grip, pinning my arms to my sides, using his body weight to crush me against the wall. I could not move. I could not fight. I was trapped. Dr. Thorne reached out, his cold fingers probing the skin of my neck, searching for the pulse. I felt the sharp sting of an alcohol wipe. This was it. In seconds, I would be unconscious. In hours, I would be institutionalized. My recording would be useless if I was locked away where no one could find it. I had the evidence, but I was about to lose my voice. The needle moved closer, hovering just inches from my skin. I stared at it. I stared at the end of my life. But I was Harrison Ford. I was an engineer, and engineers always have a backup plan. I took a deep breath, preparing for the pain, preparing for the darkness, but my mind was already racing to the one variable they had not accounted for, the one thing that could stop a needle in midair. Wait, I shouted. Wait. Greg hesitated. Thorne paused the needle a fraction of an inch from my jugular. "What?" Greg spat. "Are you ready to sign?" "No," I gasped. "But there is something you need to know before you push that plunger." "What is it?" Thorne asked, impatient. I looked directly into the camera lens of the security sensor in the corner of the room, the one I had noticed when I first walked in, the one they thought was disabled. I looked back at them. "I am not the only one listening," I said. Greg looked down at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and adrenaline, but he did not let go of my shoulders. The needle in Dr. Thorne's hand hovered, trembling slightly in the air, like a hummingbird made of glass and poison. They were committed to their path of destruction, but they had not yet processed the words I had just spoken. They did not understand that the dynamic of power in this room had just shifted violently in my favor. I did not struggle against Greg's grip anymore. I did not try to twist away or shout for mercy. I simply relaxed my muscles, standing against the wall, with the calm assurance of a man who knows the bridge will hold because he calculated the load himself. I looked my son-in-law dead in the eye and spoke with a voice that was barely above a whisper, but carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "Greg," I said, enunciating every syllable, "I am going to give you one chance. Just one. You are going to take your hands off me. You are going to step back 3 paces, and you are going to do it right now. Because if you do not, if that needle touches my skin even for a second, you are not just going to lose this house. You are going to spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary." Greg blinked, his grip loosening just a fraction. He looked at Dr. Thorne uncertainly. "What is he talking about?" Greg asked, his voice wavering. "He is bluffing." "Just do it, doctor." "He is not bluffing," Dr. Thorne said softly, his eyes fixed on my chest. He lowered the syringe slowly, the predatory gleam in his eyes replaced by the cold calculation of a man assessing a fatal error. "Look at his tie, Greg. Look under the knot." Greg frowned, looking down at my chest. There, clipped discreetly beneath the burgundy silk, was the small black device. It was not just a recorder, as I had let them believe earlier. It was something far more dangerous. I reached up slowly, pushing Greg's hand away from my shoulder. He let go this time, his fingers retreating as if my shirt were made of fire. I adjusted my jacket, straightening my dignity along with my clothes. "You thought I was a senile old man," I said, my voice filling the silent room. "You thought I was confused about my keys and my accounts. But you forgot who I am. I am a structural engineer. I do not build anything without a failsafe." I tapped the device with my index finger. "This is not a voice recorder," I explained, watching the blood drain from Natalie's face. "This is a high-fidelity cellular transmitter. It has been broadcasting a live audio feed for the last 45 minutes. And do you know who is on the other end of that feed?" Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. "My attorney, Marcus Solano, is listening." I continued, relentless. "He has heard every word. He heard you gaslight me about the wine. He heard you admit to the foreclosure. He heard you threaten to assault me. But Marcus is not the only one." I took a step forward toward Dr. Thorne, who instinctively took a step back. Sitting in Marcus's office right now, listening to this entire dinner party on speakerphone, is Sheriff Miller. You remember Miller, don't you, Natalie? He used to come to our 4th of July barbecues. He is the chief of police for King County. And he just heard a licensed physician conspire to commit medical malpractice, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The effect of these words was instantaneous and devastating. It was like watching a building implode in slow motion. The structural integrity of their conspiracy shattered. Dr. Thorne was the first to break. He was a mercenary, and mercenaries have no loyalty when the ship starts to sink. His hands, which had been so steady when he was threatening a helpless old man, began to shake violently. The syringe slipped from his fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp plastic clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. The clear liquid splashed out onto the expensive rug, a puddle of chemical oblivion that was meant for my veins. I did not inject him. Thorne stammered, backing away, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. You heard him. I put the needle down. I was coerced. They told me he was violent. I was acting in self-defense. Shut up, Greg shouted, turning on the doctor. You brought the drugs. This was your plan. My plan, Thorne yelled back, his voice cracking. You hired me. You sent the emails. I have the emails, Greg. Natalie stood frozen by the table. She looked at the fallen syringe. She looked at her husband and the doctor turning on each other. Then she looked at me. Her face was a mask of pure horror, not remorse. Horror. She realized that this narrative she had constructed, the story of the caring daughter and the senile father, had just been incinerated. Dad, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Dad, please. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can tell Miller it was a joke. Please, Dad. They will arrest us. I looked at her. I looked at the tears streaming down her face, and for the first time tonight, they were real. But they were tears of self-pity. They were tears for a life she had thrown away because she wanted the easy way out. It is out of my hands, Natalie, I said sadly. I do not control the law. You made your choice when you locked those doors. You made your choice when you decided that my life was worth less than your comfort. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I tapped the screen, ending the transmission. Hello, Marcus, I said into the phone. Harrison Solano's voice boomed from the speaker, loud and clear and angry. Are you safe? I am safe, I replied. They have backed down. Good, Solano said. Stay right there. Miller dispatched the units 10 minutes ago when they brought out the needle. They should be turning onto the street right now. I hung up the phone and put it back in my pocket. 10 minutes ago. The reality hit them like a physical blow. The police were not coming. The police were already here. Greg ran to the window, pulling back the heavy curtains. Oh God, he moaned. Oh God, no. Natalie collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her sobbing was loud and jagged, filling the room with the sound of total defeat. I stood in the center of the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of my family. I felt a profound exhaustion settle over me. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt a deep, aching sorrow for the little girl who used to ride on my shoulders. But I also felt a fierce pride. I had stood my ground. I had protected my dignity. And then we heard it. At first it was faint, a low wail in the distance. Then it grew louder and louder, a rising chorus of sirens cutting through the rain. The sound of justice approaching. Blue and red lights began to flash against the walls of the dining room, pulsing through the gaps in the curtains. They swept across the terrified faces of my daughter and her husband, illuminating their crime in harsh stroboscopic light. Dr. Thorne slumped against the sideboard, defeated. Greg stared out the window, paralyzed. Natalie cried into her hands. I walked over to the table and picked up my glass of wine, the one Greg had poisoned. I looked at it for a moment, then poured it slowly onto the floor next to the syringe. The front doorbell rang. It was not a polite ring. It was a heavy, authoritative pounding accompanied by a voice that demanded entry. Police, open up. I looked at Greg. Go open the door, son, I said, my voice calm and final. I think your guests have arrived. The sound of the doorbell echoing through the house should have been the end of it, but for Greg it was the spark that ignited the gasoline of his despair. He did not move toward the door to let the officers in. Instead, he froze, his body vibrating with a chaotic energy that terrified me more than the needle ever had. He looked at the door, then he looked at me, and in that split second, his face transformed. The fear vanished, replaced by a blind, unadulterated hatred. He was not seeing his father-in-law anymore. He was seeing the architect of his destruction. He was seeing the man who had dangled a safety net and then snatched it away, leaving him to freefall into the abyss of prison and bankruptcy. "You did this," Greg screamed, his voice shredding the tense atmosphere. "You planned this whole thing. You came here to entrap us. You wanted to ruin me." He was hyperventilating, his chest heaving. He began to pace back and forth like a caged animal, looking for a way out where there was none. He looked at the window, but the flashing blue lights outside told him there was no escape. He looked at the hallway, but he knew the police were seconds away from kicking down the door. So he looked at the table. His eyes locked onto the serrated steak knife that lay next to his unfinished dinner. It was a heavy, expensive utensil with a bone handle, the kind used to cut through thick cuts of meat. "Greg, no," I said, raising my hands calmly. "Do not do it, son. It is over. Just open the door." He did not listen. He lunged for the table, snatching the knife with a speed born of pure adrenaline. He held it out in front of him, the blade shaking in his grip. "I am not going to jail because of you," he spat. "You ruined my life, Harrison. You judged me from the day you met me. You never thought I was good enough for her. You hoarded your millions while I drowned. You owe me this life. You owe me." He was not making sense. He was unraveling. The narrative he had built in his head, where he was the victim and I was the villain, had taken over completely. He took a step toward me, the knife pointed at my chest. "Greg, stop!" Dr. Thorne yelled from the corner, but he made no move to intervene. He was cowering, protecting himself. Greg took another step. I saw his muscles tense. I saw the decision form in his eyes. He was going to attack. He was going to try to hurt me, perhaps thinking in his delusional state that if I were gone, the witness would be gone. He lunged. It was a clumsy, desperate thrust aimed wildly at my midsection. I am 70 years old, but I am not helpless. For the past 15 years, every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I have attended an Aikido class at the community center. I started it for the cardio to keep my heart healthy after Eleanor was diagnosed, but I stayed for the philosophy of harmony, the art of using your opponent's energy against them. I am not a fighter, but I understand physics. I understand leverage. And I understand that when a heavy object moves with too much momentum, it is easy to redirect. As Greg thrust the knife toward me, I did not retreat. I stepped forward and to the side, a movement called irimi. I reached out and caught his wrist, not stopping the force, but guiding it. I pivoted on my left foot, turning my body in the same direction he was moving. It was a simple, circular motion, a transfer of kinetic energy. I applied pressure to his wrist and added my own weight to his forward momentum. Greg's eyes went wide with shock. He expected resistance. He expected me to cower. Instead, he found himself flying forward, his own aggression serving as the engine of his downfall. I released his wrist at the apex of the turn. He stumbled past me, his feet tangling in the rug. He could not stop. He crashed heavily into the large glass display cabinet that stood against the far wall. The impact was tremendous. The glass shattered with a deafening crash, raining shards down onto the floor. The expensive china plates and crystal glasses, the symbols of the status they cherished so much, came tumbling down, burying him in a pile of broken luxury. Greg lay there amidst the wreckage, groaning, the knife sliding from his hand and skittering across the floor. He was not dead, just winded and defeated, covered in the debris of his own making. I stood over him, breathing hard, my heart hammering, but my feet planted firmly on the ground. "Stay down, Greg," I said, my voice steady. "Do not get up." While her husband lay in a heap of broken glass, Natalie did not run to help him. She did not scream for the doctor. Survival instinct had stripped away her humanity, leaving only a frantic need to erase the past. She looked at the blue folder on the table, the one containing the fake medical history and the power of attorney, the evidence of their conspiracy. She snatched the folder up, her movements jerky and manic. She grabbed the papers Dr. Thorne had left on the table as well. "No," she muttered, her eyes wild. "No, no, no. They can't see this." She ran to the gas fireplace in the living room, which was flickering with a decorative flame. She fell to her knees, ripping the papers out of the folder. She began shoving them into the fire, her hands shaking so badly she dropped half of them on the hearth. "Natalie, stop, it is useless," I said, watching her from the dining room. She ignored me. She was shoving the documents into the flames, watching the edges curl and blacken. "Burn," she hissed. "Burn, you stupid papers." I watched her with a profound sense of pity. She looked small. She looked like a child trying to hide a broken vase before her parents came home. She did not realize that in the digital age, paper means nothing. She did not know that I had photos of every document on my phone. She did not know that the email from Dr. Thorne was already preserved on a cloud server. She was burning ash. She was destroying nothing but her own dignity. I did not try to stop her. I did not move to pull the papers from the fire. I just stood there and watched. It was a tragic scene. My daughter, the woman I had raised to be strong and honest, kneeling in her ruined dress feeding lies to a fire while her husband lay bleeding in the dining room. The house was destroying itself from the inside out. The pounding on the front door stopped. There was a brief, heavy silence, then a loud mechanical crack as the wood of the door frame gave way. The door flew open, slamming against the wall. "Police, get on the ground!" The shout was loud, commanding, and absolute. A swarm of dark uniforms poured into the hallway. Beams of bright white light cut through the dim, romantic lighting of the house, blinding and sharp. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. I raised my hands slowly, keeping them visible. "I am the victim," I said clearly and calmly. "The men who attacked me are in the dining room." 2 officers moved past me, guns drawn but pointed low. They saw Greg trying to push himself up from the glass. "Stay on the ground. Put your hands behind your back now." Greg slumped back, defeated, his face pressed into the shards of his broken life. Another officer moved toward the fireplace where Natalie was still frantically trying to push burning paper deeper into the logs. "Ma'am, step away from the fire. Step away now." She turned to look at the light, her face smeared with soot and tears, her eyes wide and unseeing. She looked like a ghost caught in the beam of a headlight. "But I have to finish it," she whispered deliriously. "I just have to finish it." The officer holstered his weapon and moved in, grabbing her arm firmly, but not roughly, pulling her away from the flames. "It is over, ma'am," he said. I looked around the room. The dinner party was over. The trap had been sprung. And as the cold wind from the broken door rushed into the house, chilling the air, I realized that I had won the war, but I had lost everything that made it worth fighting. However, I was alive. I was free. And I was standing tall. The engineering held. The foundation was strong. And tomorrow I would begin the long, hard work of clearing the rubble. The room was a kaleidoscope of flashing blue and red lights that bounced off the shards of broken glass scattered across the floor. The peaceful silence of the suburbs had been replaced by the crackle of police radios and the heavy, chaotic noise of justice being served. 2 officers were hauling Greg to his feet. He was bleeding from a shallow cut on his cheek where he had landed on the china cabinet, and his expensive polo shirt was torn and stained. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was whimpering, a low, pathetic sound that made him sound like a kicked dog. Dr. Thorne was already in handcuffs, sitting on one of the dining chairs, with his head bowed low, trying to hide his face from the officers, as if he could simply wish himself invisible. But amidst this wreckage, my daughter decided to play her final desperate hand. She was not in handcuffs yet. She stood near the fireplace, her face smeared with soot and tears, her chest heaving with panic. When she saw the officers looking at her, she didn't surrender. She pointed a trembling finger at me, screaming at the top of her lungs. "Help me!" she shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical soprano. "You have to help us. He is crazy. My father is having a psychotic break. He attacked my husband. He threw Greg into the cabinet. Look at the glass. Look at the knife. He tried to kill us." She ran toward a sergeant, grabbing his arm with frantic desperation. "Officer, please, you have to arrest him. He is dangerous. He has dementia." We were just trying to calm him down, and he snapped. "He is hallucinating." The sergeant looked at her, then he looked at me, standing calmly by the table with my hands raised. He looked at Greg, who was cuffed, and clearly the aggressor. "Ma'am, step back," the sergeant said, firm but polite, trying to disengage from her grip. "No, you don't understand," she yelled, tears streaming down her face, now mixed with the black ash from the burnt papers. "He has a weapon. He has a gun. He threatened to shoot us." I watched her with a cold detachment. It was fascinating in a morbid way to see how deep the rot went. She was willing to send me to prison to save herself. She was willing to brand her own father a violent criminal just to keep her house of cards from falling. For a moment, the police hesitated. Allegations of a weapon changed the dynamic. Hands moved to holsters. Eyes locked onto me with renewed suspicion. "That is enough." The voice cut through the chaos like a thunderclap. We all turned toward the shattered front door. Walking in from the rain was Marcus Solano. He was wearing his trench coat, his silver hair wet, but his stride purposeful. And right beside him was Sheriff Miller. Jim Miller was a big man, a man I had known for 20 years, a man who had eaten at my table. He looked around the room, his eyes taking in the broken glass, the syringe on the floor, and the hysterical woman. Uncle Jim Natalie sobbed, running toward him. "Thank God! You have to help me. Dad is... Sheriff Miller held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. He didn't look at her with the affection of an old family friend. He looked at her with the disappointment of a lawman who sees a criminal. "Save it." Natalie Miller said it, his voice rough with disgust. "But he attacked Greg," she stammered. "We know exactly what happened here," Natalie Solano said, stepping forward. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen and held it up. The audio was crisp and clear, amplified by the silence of the room. It was the recording from 10 minutes ago. "I do not care about dignity anymore, Dad. I care about survival. Your money is the only thing that can save us. Finish it. Get the signature. I do not care how." Natalie's voice rang out from the phone, filling the dining room with her own venom. The color drained from her face. She stepped back, shaking her head as if denying the reality of her own words. Solano tapped the screen again, skipping forward. "Give him the shot. I need to find a vein in his neck." The recording stopped. Solano lowered the phone. "We heard it all," Miller said, staring at Natalie. "We heard the conspiracy. We heard the threat of assault. We heard the false imprisonment. And we heard you try to burn the evidence." Natalie looked from Miller to Solano, and then finally she looked at me. The realization that there was no way out, no lie big enough to cover this, hit her. She slumped against the wall, her legs unable to support the weight of her guilt. "But Dad," she whispered, her voice broken and small. We just needed the money. We are going to lose the house. We are going to lose everything." I walked over to her. The officers stepped aside, letting me pass. I stood in front of my daughter, looking down at the woman who had tried to erase my existence. "You wanted the money," I said quietly. "That is what this was all about. The $15 million. "Yes," she sobbed. "We are drowning, Dad. Please, just tell them not to arrest us. I will sign whatever you want. Just give us a loan. Please." I shook my head slowly. "You don't understand, Natalie," I said. "You never did. You thought you were fighting for a prize that was sitting on the table. You thought if you just drugged me and got my signature, you would be rich." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But you were fighting for a ghost." She looked up, confusion clouding her tear-filled eyes. "What you wanted guardianship over my estate," I continued. "You wanted control of my liquid assets. But Natalie, there are no liquid assets. Not anymore." "What are you talking about?" she breathed. Yesterday morning I said, my voice hard and absolute. Before I even knew for sure what you were planning, I met with Solano. We didn't just talk about defense. We talked about protection. I signed a document yesterday at 9 in the morning. I leaned in closer so she wouldn't miss a single syllable. I transferred the entire portfolio. The stocks, the bonds, the cash. All $15 million. It is gone, Natalie. Gone. She gasped. I moved it into an irrevocable trust, I said. Do you know what that means? She shook her head, staring at me with horror. It means I don't own it anymore, I explained. It belongs to the Ford Family Foundation. It is locked away legally and permanently. I can't touch it. You can't touch it. And no court order in the world can touch it. Even if you had succeeded tonight, even if I was drooling in a padded room right now, and you had that power of attorney, it would have been a worthless piece of paper. You would have gone to the bank, and they would have laughed at you. I saw the light go out in her eyes. It was not the fear of jail. It was something far worse for her. It was the realization that the money was truly forever out of reach. The foreclosure was happening. The bankruptcy was happening. The poverty she feared so much was not just a possibility, it was a certainty. You gave it all away, she whispered. To spite us? No, I said, straightening up. To protect it from vultures. I left myself a pension. I will be fine. But you have nothing. Natalie made a sound that I will never forget. It was a guttural scream, a sound of pure materialistic agony. She slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor in a heap of expensive fabric and ruined dreams. She didn't reach for me. She didn't reach for her husband. She pounded her fists against the floor, screaming about the money, screaming about the house, screaming about the unfairness of a world where she couldn't steal what she hadn't earned. Sheriff Miller nodded to the officer standing next to her. Get her up, Miller said. Read her rights. As the officer pulled Natalie to her feet and clicked the handcuffs around her wrists, she looked at me one last time. There was no love. There was no hate. There was just emptiness. I turned away. I walked over to Solano, who put a hand on my shoulder. Let's go home, Harrison, Solano said softly. I looked back at the dining room one last time. The broken glass, the spilt wine, the family I had built destroying itself in a bonfire of greed. Yes, I said. Let's go. I walked out into the rain, leaving them to the justice they so richly deserved. The chaos in the dining room had settled into a grim procedural rhythm, the kind of organized dismantling of a life that only law enforcement can execute. I stood near the shattered display cabinet, watching the consequences of greed unfold in real time. Dr. Thorne was the first to be processed. The man who had walked into my home with the arrogance of a god holding the power of life and death in a syringe was now reduced to a trembling figure in a torn blazer. An officer twisted his arms behind his back, and the metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoed through the silent house. Thorne flinched at the sound, a physical reaction to the end of his career and his freedom. He did not look at me. He stared at the floor, mumbling about his medical license, about how this was all a misunderstanding, but nobody was listening. The officer, reciting his Miranda rights, spoke over him a monotone litany that sealed his fate. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. Thorne was being charged with medical malpractice, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The weight of those charges would crush him. He would never practice medicine again. He would trade his sterile clinics and golf games for a prison cell, and the irony was that he had done it all for a share of money that I had already given away. Next was Greg. 2 officers hauled him up from the floor, where he had been wallowing in the glass shards of the life he had destroyed. He was bleeding from a cut on his cheek, and his eyes were wild with a mixture of pain and disbelief. He tried to pull away as the cold steel of the cuffs locked around his wrists, but he had no fight left in him. The bravado he had shown when he was threatening an old man was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization that he was about to lose everything. He looked at me, his face twisted with hate. "You did this!" he spat, his voice wet and ragged. "You set us up! You ruined us!" I looked at him calmly, feeling nothing but a distant pity. "I did not set you up, Greg," I said softly. "I gave you a rope hoping you would climb out of the hole you dug, but instead you used it to hang yourself. You are being arrested for elder abuse and assault with a weapon. You chose violence when you could have chosen honesty." The officers pushed him forward, marching him toward the front door. He stumbled, his expensive shoes crunching on the broken glass, a final insult to the image of perfection he had tried so hard to maintain. Then the room fell quiet again, leaving only the sound of ragged breathing. It was Natalie. She was sitting on one of the dining chairs where an officer had placed her. She was not in handcuffs yet. The police often handle family disputes with a delicate touch until the final moment, but the air around her was heavy with impending doom. She looked small. The soot from the fireplace was smeared across her cheek like war paint that had run in the rain. Her designer dress was ruined. Her hair was a mess. She looked up and saw me standing there watching her. For a moment, I saw the daughter I had raised. I saw the little girl who used to wait by the window for me to come home from work. But then she spoke and the illusion shattered. "Daddy," she whimpered, her voice trembling. "Daddy, please don't let them take me." She stood up, taking a shaky step toward me. The officer near her moved to intervene, but I held up a hand, signaling him to wait. I wanted to hear this. I needed to hear this. "I didn't mean to hurt you," she cried, tears streaming down her face, washing away the soot in long, dark streaks. "It was Greg. It was all Greg's idea. He made me do it, Dad. He said we had no choice. He said you were being unreasonable and that we had to take control. I was scared, Dad. I was just scared of losing the house. I didn't want to hurt you. You have to believe me." I listened to her words, and I felt a cold stone settle in my chest. Even now, at the end, she could not take responsibility. She was throwing her husband, the man she had sworn to love and cherish, to the wolves, just to save her own skin. She was blaming everyone but herself. "Greg didn't force you to lie to me for 6 months, Natalie," I said, my voice steady but heavy with sorrow. "Greg didn't force you to invite a corrupt doctor into our home. Greg didn't force you to light that fire and try to burn the evidence. You did those things. You made those choices." "No, Daddy, no!" she shrieked, falling to her knees and reaching out to grab my hand. Her grip was desperate, clammy. "I am your daughter. I am your little girl. You can't let them arrest me. Please. Just tell Bob it was a mistake. Tell the sheriff we were just arguing. You can stop this. You have the power to stop this." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and pleading. She was using every weapon she had left. Her childhood. Our memories. My love for her. She was weaponizing the bond of blood to escape the consequences of her greed. And God help me, a part of me wanted to do it. A part of me wanted to pull her up and hug her and tell the police to go away. No father wants to see his child in chains. No father wants to be the one who sends his daughter to prison. My heart was breaking, cracking down the center with a pain that was sharper than any knife. But then I looked at the table. I saw the syringe lying in a puddle of wine. I saw the spot where I had stood when she told them to inject me. "Finish it," she had said. "I don't care how." She had been willing to erase my mind, to steal my soul just to keep her status. If I saved her now, I wouldn't be helping her. I would be enabling a monster. I would be saying that money matters more than morality, that family is an excuse for abuse. I had spent my life protecting her from the world, but I could not protect her from herself anymore. I gently pulled my hand from her grip. It was the hardest physical movement I have ever made in my life. It felt like I was severing a limb. Natalie stared at my empty hand, her sobbing stopping for a second in sheer shock. "Dad," she whispered. I turned away from her. I couldn't look at her eyes anymore. I looked at the sheriff who was standing by the doorway, watching us with a somber expression. He was an old friend, a man who had known Natalie since she was in diapers. He looked tired. He hated this as much as I did, but he was a man of the law. "Bob," I said, my voice sounding strange to my own ears, old and weary. "Yes, Harrison," Bob replied, stepping forward. "What do you want to do, Harrison? It is your call on the charges for her. We have enough on the husband and the doctor, but she is your daughter." The room held its breath. Natalie held her breath. This was it. The final decision. The moment that would define the rest of our lives. I looked out the window at the rain falling in sheets against the glass. I thought about Eleanor. I thought about what she would say. She would be devastated, but she was also a woman of principle. She knew that actions have consequences. "Do the right thing, Harrison," she would have said, "even when it breaks your heart." I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of rain and burnt paper. "Process her, Bob." The words hung in the air, final and absolute. "What?" Natalie gasped. "No." "Dad, no, follow the procedure." I continued, not looking back. She was a co-conspirator. She attempted to destroy evidence. She was complicit in the assault. "Treat her like you would treat anyone else." "Harrison," Bob said softly. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," I said. "If I save her now, she will never learn. She will never change. She needs to face this, Bob. We all do." Bob nodded slowly. He signaled to the female officer standing nearby. Natalie screamed. It was a raw, primal sound of disbelief and betrayal. "Dad. You can't do this. I am your daughter. I hate you. I hate you." The officer pulled her up. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was like a gavel coming down on 40 years of fatherhood. I started walking. I walked past the dining table. I walked past the broken glass. I walked past the fireplace where the ashes of their lies were still smoldering. I walked toward the open door where the night air was rushing in cold and clean. Natalie's screams followed me. "You selfish old man. I hope you die alone. I hate you." Her words tore at my back like claws, but I did not stop. I did not turn around. I knew that if I looked back, I might crumble. I might turn into a pillar of salt made of tears and regret. So I kept my eyes forward. I stepped over the threshold and onto the wet pavement of the driveway. The rain hit my face, mixing with the tears I had finally allowed to fall. It was cold. It was shocking. But it felt real. It felt like a baptism. Behind me, the blue lights flashed against the house I had bought, the house that had become a prison of greed. Inside, my family was being led away in chains. But out here in the dark, I was free. I was alone, yes. My heart was shattered, yes. But I was standing on my own 2 feet. I was Harrison Ford. I was a builder. And even though the house had fallen down, the foundation remained. I walked toward my car, the sirens wailing in the distance, ready to drive into a future that was uncertain but mine. The sound of a gavel striking wood is a singular final noise that cuts through the air like a guillotine blade. It signals the end of arguments and the beginning of consequences. 3 months after that disastrous dinner party, I sat in the back row of the King County Superior Court and listened to that sound echo against the high ceilings. The room smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety. I was not there to testify anymore. I was there as a witness to the wreckage. Dr. Thorne stood before the judge first. The arrogance that had filled my dining room, the sneer he wore when he held that syringe, was gone. In his orange jumpsuit, he looked deflated like a balloon that had lost its air. The judge was merciless. He called Thorne a disgrace to the medical profession, A predator who used his license as a weapon against the vulnerable. The sentence was swift. 5 years in a state penitentiary for conspiracy to commit kidnapping and assault with a deadly weapon. But the prison time was not the real punishment for a man like him. The real blow came when the medical board representative stood up and formally revoked his license to practice medicine. He would never wear a white coat again. He would never hold a scalpel or write a prescription. He was stripped of his identity, leaving him nothing but a number in a system he used to think he was above. Then it was Greg's turn. My son-in-law refused to look at me. He stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched tight. His lawyer tried to argue for leniency, citing stress and financial pressure, but the judge had heard the audio recording. He had heard the violence in Greg's voice, the clear intent to harm an elderly man for financial gain. 3 years. That was the price of his greed. 3 years behind bars where he would have plenty of time to think about the serrated steak knife he had pointed at my chest. As the bailiff led him away, Greg finally turned his head. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. I didn't see remorse. I saw hatred. He still blamed me. He still believed that I was the villain for not letting him rob me. I watched him disappear through the side door, and I felt a strange sense of relief mixed with a heavy sorrow. I had protected myself, but I had failed to teach him what it means to be a man. And then there was Natalie, my daughter. The little girl who used to hold my hand when we crossed the street. She stood alone at the defense table. She looked thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a cheap gray suit that didn't fit her properly. Because of my testimony requesting leniency, and because she had no prior record, the judge decided to suspend her prison sentence. She was given 5 years of probation. She would not go to jail. But as she walked out of that courtroom, she walked into a prison of her own making that was far worse than any cell. The financial nuke I had launched with the irrevocable trust had detonated, and the fallout was absolute. Without access to my millions, and with Greg in prison, she had no way to pay the mortgage on the colonial house. The bank had moved quickly. The foreclosure was finalized last week. I learned through Solano that she had been evicted on a rainy Tuesday, much like the night she tried to betray me. She had to pack her life into cardboard boxes and leave the home she had killed her relationship with me to keep. She was now living in a small rental apartment on the south side of the city. It was a place with thin walls and peeling linoleum, the kind of place she used to drive past and sneer at. She had lost her status. She had lost her friends who disappeared the moment the scandal broke. She was working as a receptionist at a dental office, making barely enough to cover rent and buy groceries. As she walked down the aisle of the courtroom, she stopped near my row. She hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might say she was sorry. I thought she might finally understand. But she just looked at me with hollow, dead eyes and kept walking. She didn't say a word. The silence between us was a canyon so wide that no bridge could ever span it. She was free legally, but she was shackled by her own resentment. She had chosen money over her father, and in the end, she lost both. I drove back to my penthouse alone. The city of Seattle passed by in a blur of gray and green. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence hit me. It was a physical weight. I walked into the living room and looked out at the Space Needle standing tall against the clouds. I had won. The engineers would call it a successful defense of the structure. The foundation held. The intruders were repelled. My assets were safe. The trust was secure, ensuring that the money I earned would go to causes that actually mattered, like the hospital wing for Eleanor. I was safe. I was wealthy. I was free. But as I sat down in my leather armchair, the same one I had sat in for years, I looked around the empty room. There were no photos of grandchildren on the mantelpiece anymore. I had taken them down because it hurt too much to look at them. There would be no Sunday dinners. There would be no holiday visits. I realized then the bitter truth that comes with this kind of victory. You can hire the best lawyers. You can outsmart the greediest con artists. You can protect your bank accounts with ironclad trusts. But you cannot buy loyalty. You cannot write a check for filial piety. I had spent my life building. I built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds. I built bridges that connected cities. I built a fortune that could last generations. But the one thing I failed to build was a family that valued me for who I was, not for what I could give them. I thought that by providing for them, by giving them everything they asked for, I was showing love. But perhaps I was just feeding a hunger that could never be satisfied. I created a dependency that turned into entitlement, and when the tap ran dry, the love evaporated with it. I poured myself a glass of water and sat in the quiet. I thought about the man in the story, the truck driver who found betrayal in his own bed. I felt a kinship with him. We are the providers, the protectors, the men who give until we are empty, and then get attacked for not having more to give. But we are also the survivors. I looked at my hands. They were old hands, wrinkled and spotted with age, but they were still strong. I was alone, yes. The betrayal had burned the forest to the ground. But in the ashes, I could see the ground clearly for the first time in years. I picked up my phone and opened the calendar. I had a meeting with the hospital board tomorrow. We were breaking ground on the Eleanor Ford pediatric wing next month. I had a lunch scheduled with Marcus Solano, my true friend. I had my Aikido class on Thursday. My life was not over. It was just different. It was quieter. But it was honest. I no longer had to wonder if the people smiling at me were waiting for me to die. I knew the truth. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. The storm had passed. The rain had stopped, and a pale sunlight was breaking through the clouds. I was Harrison Ford. I was a structural engineer, and I was still standing. I had lost the people I thought were my world, but I had reclaimed my dignity. And as I looked out at the city, I realized that dignity is a lonely companion, but it is the only one that will never let you down. I turned away from the window and walked into the kitchen to make dinner. Just for one. And for the first time in a long time, the food tasted like freedom. The weeks following the trial were defined not by silence, but by a new kind of noise. It wasn't the laughter of grandchildren or the clinking of dinner plates. It was the ringing of the telephone in a small rented office downtown. I had named it the Burke Defense Initiative. It wasn't a vanity project. It was a reinforcement structure for people whose foundations were cracking. One rainy Tuesday, a man named Thomas sat across from my desk. He was my age, wearing a frayed coat and holding a hat in hands that shook with a tremor I recognized all too well. It was the tremor of betrayal. He told me how his son had tricked him into signing over the deed to his farm, claiming it was for tax purposes, and now Thomas was sleeping in his truck. "I feel so stupid, Mr. Burke," Thomas whispered, staring at the floor. "I built that farm with my own hands. How didn't I see it?" I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the desk. "You didn't see it because you were looking through the eyes of a father, not an auditor," I told him, my voice firm. "Engineers know that even the strongest steel can fail if you apply enough heat in the wrong place. Your love was the heat, Thomas. They used it to melt your defenses. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. But now we stop being just human. Now we become operators." We spent the next 3 hours mapping out a legal strategy with Solano. When Thomas left, he stood straighter. The shame had evaporated from his eyes, replaced by a cold resolve. Watching him walk out the door, I realized something profound. I had spent months mourning the loss of my family, letting the anger corrode my own spirit like rust on iron. But saving Thomas, giving him back his dignity, it did something the money never could. It repaired the structural damage in my own soul. I realized that true strength isn't just about surviving the blast. It's about clearing the debris and building something new. I couldn't save my relationship with Natalie. The trust was a bridge that had collapsed beyond repair, but I could choose not to leave her in the rubble. I could offer her a blueprint, a hard, unforgiving blueprint, but a path forward nonetheless. That night I picked up the phone and called my private investigator. "Find her," I said. "Find out where she is working. I have one last inspection to make." It took 6 months before I worked up the courage to see her again. I had spent that time rebuilding the quiet rhythms of my life, attending board meetings for the new hospital wing, and learning how to cook for one again. But a father never truly stops worrying, even when his heart has been hardened by betrayal. I parked my car in the cracked asphalt lot of a discount supermarket on the edge of town, a place where the fluorescent lights hummed too loudly, and the air smelled of floor wax and stale produce. This was Natalie's new reality. Through my private investigator, I knew she had been working double shifts here, trying to scrape together enough for rent in a studio apartment that was smaller than the walk-in closet she used to have. I pulled my coat tighter around me and walked through the automatic doors. I spotted her immediately at Register 4. She looked 10 years older than the last time I saw her in the courtroom. Her hair, once manicured and highlighted, was pulled back in a messy ponytail, showing roots of gray she could no longer afford to hide. Her nails were short and unpolished. She was scanning items with a robotic efficiency, beep after beep, moving cans of soup and loaves of bread across the sensor without looking up. She wore a green vest that hung loosely on her frame, and her name tag hung slightly askew. I stood in her line behind a woman buying cat food and waited. When it was my turn, I placed a single apple on the belt. Natalie reached for it, her eyes fixed on the scanner. It was only when her hand brushed mine as I handed her the cash that she looked up. Her eyes went wide. The apple rolled slightly on the metal counter. She froze, and for a moment I thought she might run or scream like she did that night at the house. But she just stood there, paralyzed by shame. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din of the store. "Hello, Natalie," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "You look tired." "I am tired," she admitted, looking down at her hands. "I am tired all the time." The line behind me was growing, but I did not care. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a white envelope. It was not thick. It did not contain a check. It contained a single heavy brass key. I slid it across the counter, placing it next to the apple. Natalie stared at it. "What is this?" she asked, suspicion clouding her eyes. "Is this a buyout? Are you paying me to go away?" "No," I said firmly. "It is a key." "A key to what?" "To your house," I said. She looked up at me, confused. "My house is gone, Dad. The bank took it. They evicted me. Someone bought it at the auction last week." "I know," I said. "I bought it." The silence that stretched between us was heavy with unsaid words. She opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to thank me, perhaps to ask if she could move back in for free, but I cut her off before she could start. "Do not misunderstand this gesture, Natalie," I said, my voice hard as steel. "I did not buy it to give it back to you. I bought it as an investment. The house is mine. The deed is in my name." "Then why are you giving me the key?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Because I am offering you a lease," I explained. "You can move back in. You can have your garden back. You can sleep in your own bedroom. But there are conditions. 2 of them." She waited, tears welling in her eyes. "First," I continued, "you will pay me rent every single month. Fair market value. If you miss a payment by even 1 day, the eviction notice will be filed the next morning. You will work. You will earn your keep. You will understand the value of $1 in a way you never did before." I can do that," she stammered, nodding quickly. "I will work extra shifts. I will pay you. What is the second condition?" I looked her dead in the eye, exposing the secret I had uncovered during my investigation. The root cause of the debt that she had. "Hidden even from Greg, you will attend Gamblers Anonymous 3 times a week," I said. and you will provide me with signed proof of attendance." Natalie flinched as if I had slapped her. She looked around nervously, terrified that someone might have heard. "I know about the online casinos, Natalie," I said softly. "I know about the losses. I know that is where the mortgage money went. It wasn't just lifestyle. It was addiction." She crumbled then. The defiance left her shoulders. She covered her face with her hands and nodded slowly, a sob escaping her throat. "I will go," she whispered. "I promise." I didn't hug her. I didn't tell her everything was going to be okay. I simply nodded. "Good," I said. "The lease agreement is in the envelope. Sign it and mail it to Solano." I picked up my apple and walked away. I didn't look back to see if she was watching me. I couldn't. I had to be strong enough for both of us. I walked out into the cool evening air and got back into my car. As I turned the ignition and pulled out of the parking lot, I felt a shift inside me. The anger that had fueled me for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of purpose. I had saved my fortune, yes, but more importantly, I had finally parented my daughter. I had given her a roof, but I had refused to be her crutch. Whether she sank or swam was now entirely up to her. I drove toward the highway, the city lights blurring past me. I thought about the millions of dollars sitting in the foundation I had created. I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I wasn't just going to build a hospital wing. I was going to launch a legal defense fund, a specialized organization dedicated to protecting the elderly from financial abuse. I would hire lawyers to help men and women like me, people who were being coerced, gaslighted, and robbed by the very people who were supposed to love them. I would make sure that no other father had to stand in his dining room and face a needle alone. The road ahead was open and clear. I was 70 years old, but I felt like my life was just beginning. I had survived the fire, and I had come out the other side not as a victim, but as a warrior. I looked into the rearview mirror one last time, watching the supermarket disappear into the distance. I had done my duty. Now it was time to live. Do not let blood blind your reason. Do not let the word family become a shackle that binds you to abuse. Love should never cost you your dignity, and it certainly should never cost you your safety. If you feel something is wrong, trust your gut. Investigate. Record. Protect yourself before it is too late. Because at the end of the day, the only person who can truly save you is you. My name is Harrison Burke, and I survived. If this story resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications. There are thousands of stories like mine out there, and together we can shine a light on the truth. Thank you for listening, and stay safe. This story teaches us the painful but necessary lesson that financial boundaries are a form of self-respect. Harrison's journey reveals that enabling bad behavior, even out of love for a child, often leads to destruction rather than support. True love sometimes requires making hard decisions, like cutting off financial access to force a loved one to face their own responsibilities and addictions. We learn that dignity is our most valuable asset, and protecting it, even from family, is not an act of selfishness, but an act of survival. Never apologize for securing your own future. If you believe that respect is more important than money, type "I choose dignity" in the comments below.